Our first presenters for today are Cody Yager. He's our Avian Field Specialist for USDA APHIS Animal Care, and Andrea D'Ambrosio. She's the Animal Care Inspector for USDA APHIS Animal Care. Today, they will be talking about overview of USDA inspection process. Cody?
Thank you, Shannon. Hello, everyone, and good morning or afternoon or wherever you're joining us from. And thank you for attending this session. And I'm really impressed to see the numbers turns out for this presentation. You guys realize this is a regulatory talk, right? So yesterday we had some amazing topics, and the rest of today is going to be no exception. But like a true government employee, I'm going to break the party up and stop the fun and talk about regulations and all the rules you guys got to follow. No. I'm going to try to make this as quick and painless as possible. And Andrea and I have some interesting data to present, some information and resources to share in terms of helping you prepare and maintain your environmental enhancement plan, and to share with you, even if you aren't licensed or registered with us. But I am interested real quick to see how many licensees and registrants that we have here with us. Can you please make a reaction if you are a licensee or registered with us, or if you work at a facility? Great, that's great. That's a great turnout. Glad to see that. Well, in order to make this dense regulatory talk quick and painless, I'm going to be throwing like a lot of information at you guys very rapidly. And kind of much like this cockatiel here, you're going to be surrounded by a lot. To make this manageable for you, I've included multiple QR codes with website addresses that will contain all the information that I've presented over here and even more. So what I strongly suggest is that you screenshot this, you take a picture, and you have these websites saved. So if you think you're going to need this information down the road. So I know I'm going to be throwing a lot at you. Don't feel like you have to memorize everything that I'm going to be presenting here, because one of the resources I'm sharing you, there's going to be a video of almost all this information already on there. So just try to get whatever you can from that. But what I strongly recommend is that you save these resources that you can use down the road. There we go. All right. So in this session, I'll be talking about how birds got added to the Animal Welfare Act, who needs to be licensed or registered. I'm going to give a very speedy tour through the regulations and look at some of the current trends over the year our program has been regulating avian use facilities. Lastly, Andrea will be going over how to write a compliant environmental enhancement plan. Now, as with most governmental processes, the journey in getting birds covered by the Animal Welfare Act was no quick development. Back in 2002, the Farm Security and Rural Investment Act included provisions that amended the definition of animal in the act, which meant that birds not bred for research and not otherwise excluded was for the first time subject to the Animal Welfare Act regulations. Now, beginning in 2013, several animal welfare organizations filed lawsuits against USDA for failure to promulgate regulations for birds in a timely manner. As a result of one of those lawsuits in 2020, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Court required APHIS to issue standards applicable to birds not bred for use in research using the rulemaking schedule that required listening sessions, the publication of the proposed rule, and the publication of the final rule by February 21st of last year. This was, of course, accomplished, and by February of this year, all newly covered activity must have been licensed or registered with USDA Animal Care. All right, So now let's kind of talk about what's considered covered activity under the Animal Welfare Act as it relates to birds. All right, a license or a registration may be needed depending on the types of activity you do for birds. Now, for businesses that sell, broker, or exhibit birds, a license is required. Now, but for businesses that are involved with the transportation of other people's animals or conduct research, a registration may be required. Now, there's 3 different types of licenses. There's the Class A, which are for people that are breeding and selling those animals hatched on their property. Class B are for those people who purchase and are then reselling animals that were not hatched on their property. And then Class C, which are those that are exhibiting animals to the public. And then we'll be going over the registration types a little later. Now, before now that you got a general idea of the covered activity types, selling, exhibiting, transportation, and research, and before we dig too far in those types, let's kind of cross out some activities that don't apply under the Act. Animal use activities that don't require a license or a registration include birds solely used or intended to be used for food, fiber, or improving animal nutrition, breeding management, production efficiency, or improving the quality of food and fiber. So in other words, kind of your typical farm agricultural purposes are not covered under the Animal Welfare Act. Other activities that are not covered include exhibition of exclusively domesticated farm-type animals that are intended to advance the agricultural arts and sciences, birds used for falconry, birds used to promote falconry, and birds in pigeon races and fancier shows. And lastly, birds kept solely for an individual's use or enjoyment. So just because you own birds doesn't mean you need a license or registration. Now, this is where it gets a little dense here. We're going to go to our license types, starting off with the Class A, which are selling birds for pets or exhibition that were hatched on your premises. And there's 2 main points here. For Class A, I'd like to go over with you. For the thresholds, the first being the thresholds, if you sell more than 200 pet birds of species having the average body weight of 250 grams or less annually, or if you sell more than 8 pet birds of species having the average body weights of more than 250 grams annually, a license is required. So for these purposes, body weights are those of the average adult weights of the species. And then, for example, like pet birds of below 250 grams typically include like your cockatiels, your budgies, your finches, lovebirds, parakeets, while birds of 250 grams, over 250 grams would be most your cockatoos, your macaws, Amazons, African grays. Now, we do have the complete list of pet bird species as defined on the regs on our website, which will be on a QR code that you'll see later on in the presentation. It's in a document that's called Species List of Pet Birds as Defined by the Animal Welfare Act regulations. Now, sales of any species sales of birds of any species not on this list requires a license, regardless of the size or number sold annually, unless already exempt. Now, another rule that I need to talk about is the retail pet store rule. This is a really important rule. As established by the retail pet store rule, pet species that are sold in a face-to-face transactions in which the seller, the buyer, and the pet bird are all physically present at the same time of the sale. It's really important. They're all 3, buyer, seller, bird, physically present at the same time of the sale. Commonly, this includes kind of your brick and mortar pet stores, but also sales done at like bird expos. Birds of pet species sold through brokers, or any pets not among the pet species list sold under any circumstances are not eligible for the retail pet store pet rule exemption. Now, please note, sale of any non-pet species for use as pets or exhibition requires a license unless otherwise exempted. And the seller must have proper permits from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or any permits required by the state and local governments if applicable. All right, now we're going to go into Class B, which is your brokering. It's versus really anyone who resales or negotiates the purchase or sales of regulated birds, often called brokering, must be a license unless they fall in one of the exemptions. This includes kind of auctions, random source dealers, and some rescues. USDA considers acts of compensation to include any remuneration of an animal, regardless of whether it's for profit or not for profit. Remuneration includes, but it's not limited to, sales, adoption fees, donations, or other benefits received for related activities. If they do receive remuneration, they may meet the definition of a dealer. All right, now our last type of license is their Class C, the animal exhibition. The Animal Welfare Act defines an exhibitor as any person, public or private, that is exhibiting any animal which was purchased in commerce or intended to distribution of affects commerce or will affect commerce for the public for compensation. Examples include your carnivals, circuses, animal acts, zoos, educational exhibits, petting zoos, public walk-in aviaries, photo shoots with birds, and birds being given away as prizes or used to attract businesses. Now, unless exempted for reasons we've already reviewed, a license is needed if you're exhibiting more than 8 pet animals, small exotic or wild mammals, or domesticated farm-type animals. Additionally, you can exhibit up to 4 raptors without a license if you hold a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service permit, unless exhibition of any non-pet requires a license. In summary, exhibition of 8 or less pet bird species or 4 or fewer raptors with a U.S. Wildlife Service permit is exempt from license. All right, now we're going to review the registration types. There's 2 types of registrations dealing with the transportation of animals. The first is carriers, which are operators of any airline, railroad, motor carrier, shipping line, or other enterprise, which is engaged in a business for transporting any animal for hire. This is by far the more common registration type of the 2. It includes really anyone who's hired for transport to places such, you hire someone to transport to a pet store, from a pet store, or a buyer of from an animal to the purchaser. The second is an intermediate handler, who are people that receive animals in custody in connection with their transportation in commerce. This requirement covers boarding facilities that take responsibility for shipping an animal or receiving them during or after shipment. Now, specifically relating to birds, anyone solely transporting avian species under the Migratory Treaty Bird Act from the wild to a facility for rehabilitation and eventually release into the wild or between rehabilitation facilities is exempt from needing a registration. Now, on to our last registration type is research. Now, birds that are bred for use in research are not covered by the Animal Welfare Act. The term bred for use in research covers any animal that is bred in captivity and is being used or is intended for use in research, teaching, testing, or experimentation purposes. Additionally, eggs are not covered by the Animal Welfare Act and regulations, and a bird is considered a bird once the hatching process begins. Almost entirely the avian research we commonly see that would be covered are wild birds that are brought into a research setting and are not considered a field study. All right. Oh, I know that was a little dry and dense. You guys made it through, but here are those couple resources that I promised you. And if you feel like you know got maybe 5% of all that, that's not a problem. Like I said, this is where write this website down, save this. There are videos on here that go over that exact topic I just went on. You can get a copy of the regulations here. You can, get a video on how to fill out the application. You can actually watch a video on how to prepare for your first pre-license inspection. Also on this website is that list of pet bird species, as long as other documents such as frequently asked questions, what's our poultry species types as well. So we're constantly adding more information here. So this is this is the bird hub for the Animal Welfare Act that I definitely please bookmark. Another resource I want to share with you is our licensing and registration assistant. This is a cool online tool that will help you determine whether you need a license or registration by answering a series of questions. And I really like this. It's kind of like your choose your own adventure, and kind of like those books where you can kind of like choose your own path, how you want the story to end. So, if you're like, okay, I don't know, if what I'm doing is going to need a license or not. So by answering these questions, it will literally tell you yes or no, you need a license, and then it will direct you to the application page. And then you can answer the questions in different ways to see if, based on what model, if that would determine if you would need a license or a registration. So again, a great tool. I would highly recommend you save this. Now, if you do have any questions and you fill this out and it's like, it doesn't quite answer all my questions, or you have other questions about our process, about the regulations, you can always email us just at animalcare@usda.gov. Okay, and we're always happy to help. All right. Now, for this slide, I want to familiarize you with the different sections in the avian regulations. The welfare standards for birds are found in Subpart G, sections 3.150 to 3.168. Specific regulations are listed here for your review. The topics include the general facility requirements in 3.150, the indoor and outdoor regulations in 3.151 and 3.152 respectively, what the primary enclosures must ensure in 3.153, what is and what must be in the environmental enhancement plan in 3.154. This is what Andrea is going to go over in detail very shortly, okay? The requirements of feeding, watering, and water quality in 3.155 to 3.157. How to be compliant when it comes to cleaning and sanitization in 3.158. And quick pause here. I know there was a question yesterday about sanitization of enrichment items. And I just want to say that USDA doesn't have a specific frequency, nor do we have a specific method or product when you have to clean or sanitize. It just needs to be safe and effective. Okay, and what do we mean by effective? It has to be done as frequent as necessary to prevent the buildup of dirt, debris, and food waste. Droppings must, so that the droppings to prevent the soiling of the birds and reduce any disease hazards, insects, pests, or odors. I also strongly recommend that you work with your veterinarian to ensure that whatever method you choose, it's safe for your birds. That's got to be the number one priority, that whatever you do, yes, you need to clean, yes, you need to sanitize, but really make sure that that is safe for your birds, because we all know there are many products out there that will quickly cause harm to your birds. Continuing on the sections, we have the employee requirements in 3.159, followed by the compatibility and separation in 3.160. And then lastly is the transportation in 3.161 to 3.168. Just a quick note, like, I'm going over all these sections, and even if you don't need to be licensed or registered, it's always good, like, if you have a smaller facility that, like I said, doesn't need to be licensed, you might want to just see these regulations and say, hey, is everything we're doing, what do these regulations say? Is there something that we could learn from them? Is there something that's in there that we can maybe say, okay, this is an area that we haven't looked into? So it's a good resource. Other additional topics outside the subpart G that has some, while not specifically to birds, but it does have some impact to birds, is the all important but very small 1 page 2.40 vet care for birds, but it also applies to all mammalian as well. The ID requirements in 2.50E, records in 2.75B1, and then lastly is the contingency planning in 2.134. Contingency planning, really important. I think everyone should have contingency planning. Even if you have 1 bird, you should have contingency planning. I don't care where you are in the world. Every time you put on the news, somewhere in the world, there's some natural disaster going on. So please think about that. It's not only a human disaster, but it also absolutely has welfare impacts to birds. And we have some great resources. Not only do we have the regulation, you can read what needs to be in there, but we have a tech note in there, and the form too. So if you're like, I don't even really know how to build my own contingency plan, we have resources out there to help you build your own. So again, another resource, even if you're not licensed or registered, that you could take away. All right, so now that we're out of the regulations, you got through that, now let's shift into looking at some data. All right, since August of last year, we started inspecting birds at facilities that were already licensed or registered with animal care. In that 12-month period, when we just look at data with birds, we have a total of 2,686 inspections, which when we look at that, we performed over 417,000 birds around the U.S. That's just mind-numbing how many birds that is. On those inspections, we found a total of 1,332 non-compliances that range from incomplete records to kind of serious welfare concerns, where we've seen injured and dead animals. And, like I said, these are just vast, large numbers, and a quick pause of gratitude to our inspectors when I see these numbers, because not only do they see some difficult things, but they see it at some of the worst times of the year, like whether it's 115 degrees in the Arizona sun or a rainstorm in the Florida Everglades or -10 in Minnesota. Our inspectors are out there ensuring these animals' well-being. So a special thanks to them, and I'm just reminded of that when I see these numbers. So going back to the non-compliances, when we look at the top 5 non-compliances, I appreciate and I know our inspectors appreciate the responses there too. I see that. Going back to the non-compliances, you can clearly see the top 5 cited non-compliances in the bar chart off to the left, with the one being the outlier in 208 due to the environmental enhancement plan. So what is with that? So why do we have such an increase in that 3.154 plan citation in those environmental enhancement plan? Well, I went back and I read through them all of them, and nearly all of them boiled down to a few main causes. The first being they simply don't have a written plan, or they misplaced it. Now, don't confuse this not having an enrichment. I would say it's rare that we go to a facility and there's no enrichment being provided. But that's the key difference here between enrichment plan and an environmental enhancement plan. The environmental enhancement is more than just providing enrichment. it's looking at the social needs as well as the individual needs of the birds, okay? The second reason for the high incident in citations are plans missing a special consideration for the birds showing signs of psychological distress. For example, a facility might have a bird that has a feather destructive behavior, and while we understand that this condition might never resolve, we still need a plan that is approved by the facility's veterinarian that takes into account how this bird would be provided special attention regarding its environment to factor in that bird's condition. And finally, another overlooked item in the environmental enhancement plan is the social needs of individually housed birds. Now, oftentimes at no fault of the facility, a social species is housed individually. Either a mate dies, a bird is donated, and it's just no compatible conspecific. While this is allowed by the regulations, we need the facility to determine some special attention regarding its environment, because that bird's not getting that normal social interaction. So we just needed to document it in the plan how to adjust for it. Now, I don't want you to kind of just walk away from this thinking like, okay, this is just needless bureaucracy and paperwork that people are not doing that's not compliant. No. This has real impact to welfare. The reason for the plan is it ensures the facility has a mechanism in place to fully determine all the enrichment needs of their avian species are taken into account, and it allows the attending vet to review and approve it. And I can tell you from experience, you can see a difference in the level of enrichment quality from a facility that has gone through the efforts in making a plan versus those that don't. And as we heard from Michelle yesterday, it takes some effort and research in going through and looking at what is normal natural behavior and what you're trying to give your birds the option to express those. All right, I have a couple more resources here for you. In an effort to kind of assist facilities in developing their own environmental enhancement plan, I want to share two more documents. The first is a tech note that walks you through the requirements from the regulations that Andrea again will share with you here, and then we'll follow up questions that will help you design your own plan. And then next is Form 7052 that Andrea is going to go over. This is an optional form for facilities that you could fill out that covers all the requirements in 3.154. Again, this is an optional form that you can use but you feel free to make your own, okay? And with that, I turn it over to Andrea.
Great. Thank you so much, Cody. So one thing you could do is if you do have that QR code, you could kind of, if you wanted to pop it up on your phone or another item, just kind of go through it as we discuss it. So you'll see some different things. So licensed facilities, as Cody mentioned, in complying with the Animal Welfare Act, have to develop, document, and follow a species appropriate environmental enhancement plan to promote the psychological well-being of their birds. It should be in accordance with acceptable professional standards. And it has to be approved by the attending veterinarian. If there's anything we've learned from all those different enrichment devices and opportunities we give their birds, we want to make it safe for them. And sometimes your vet is the best one to go through and make sure, yes, this is appropriate for the bird species we're giving it to. So the plan has to address several key areas, including social needs for social species. So ideally, if you have social species, you're going to house them already in social groups. Your plan must describe how you use materials to enrich your bird's physical environment to express non-injurious species typical activities. If there are any birds listed under special considerations housed at your facility, you need to describe the special attention that they receive, including birds that are hand-reared, birds showing signs of psychological distress, as Cody mentioned, social species of birds that are individually housed, and birds in research that have activity restricted. And then lastly, birds that are held in a restraint device, which should always be done for the shortest period of time possible. So the biggest thing we really did come across, as Cody mentioned, is that sometimes people just didn't know where their plan was. So you need to know where it is and who has it. It's very helpful if there's a designated location at your facility where the plan can be maintained for review by the APHIS official who's coming to inspect your facility. Now, often what we initially saw when we started doing this process were enrichment calendars. And often what's presented is this calendar. It's a great thing to have calendars are great at identifying what enrichment is provided on a daily basis, but it doesn't meet the specific aims of the regulation in providing, the overall encompassing enrichment plan and listing those provisions just mentioned. So having this type of calendar, we recognize it's highly beneficial to make sure the team is providing enrichment on a daily basis that's already been approved by the attending veterinarian. So I like how this one is laid out, where you've got a section where it's identifying, the environment or the enrichment that's already provided for the cranes, and then they put it on a schedule. We have A days and we have B days, and those things can rotate. And this is really great because it breaks out the very type of enrichment and keeps it rotating for the birds. And then while your facility can absolutely enter this data into daily calendars in our computer database, if this is the way that we're getting to see all of that, sometimes just recognize it can be very time consuming if an APHIS official has to sit and comb through this data on a computer for long periods of time. All right, so reviewing and evaluating an enrichment program. So as Cody mentioned, the specific form 7052 is an optional form. Facilities could also use this template as an outline to make sure your facility is meeting the intention of the regulation. You'll see on the very first page, we do list out not only the facility, but the veterinarian, because we want to have that veterinarian involved from the very beginning. And so when we're looking at creating this plan here, the first thing you're going to notice in the next page is going to be the social species and the social area of this. I'm sorry, it's going to be the species list. So while this species list is not required, it can be helpful if there's a wide variety of species at your facility. So your facility may have a specific plan for their raptors, a specific plan for rat tights, creating a plan for waterfowl. You may have multiple plans written for different areas of your facility that you can keep it in. Recently, I was at a facility that had 2 species of birds. They had penguins and pelicans, and only the penguins were actually listed on their enrichment plan. The pelicans were inadvertently left off since they were cared for by an aquarium team. And the facility was very surprised when we pointed this out. Like, we saw this species and this, where are these guys on the plan? So overall, listing your species out, just make sure you're not missing anything and encompassing everybody's needs. All right, so social needs. So again, when we talk about social needs, you're listing the species that are housed in groups or have access to see and hear other compatible birds. You want to describe the strategies to meet the social needs of those individually housed birds, such as intermittent social housing, like we talked about earlier. And you want to be able to explain and how you assess compatibility between birds. So like Cody mentioned, in another area we've seen frequently lacking is information on parrots that are individually housed, that are social. So a lot of times it might be because they're used for education programs at facilities, and everybody recognizes how incredibly social they are. So if they're not housed together, your facility should really identify how they are offered social experiences in other ways. And that might be additional enrichment or additional handler time. As mentioned yesterday, video chats have become an interesting approach to enrichment. And one of my facilities was super creative with a singly housed hyacinth macaw. They would actually FaceTime another facility that had a single housed hyacinth just for weekly dates between the 2 birds. All right, so when you're looking at your plan, you are really going to describing the environment. So you want to describe how your housing provides opportunities to express species typical postures and positions for resting, eating, exploration, play, how that housing provides opportunities to express typical locomotion, how housing provides opportunities to make social adjustments, and then are multiple levels provided, are nest boxing or nesting materials provided, are they provided seasonally or different times of the year, and then are perches and substrates provided. So your plan, what you write out, should match what we are seeing when we're going to the physical environment for your birds. So when I'm reading it, I should then be going to be able to look at it. And this is important because I was recently reviewed a plan for parents that mentioned really great things. It mentioned a rotation schedule for hanging toys. It mentioned varied perching options provided. It mentioned puzzle feeders. However, when I went to actually go look at the enclosure, it was completely bare. There was no evidence that their written plan was being implemented at all. There were no toys present, no foraging opportunities. The back holding areas were literally empty. And so because their plan did not match what I was looking at, it caused me to really question if the facility was following their plan at all. And when I asked the facility why there was no enrichment present when they'd had it documented, they said it was due to newer, younger staff that had not been trained. So hopefully by really taking time to kind of create this plan, if your plan is well written and the enrichment items are identified, hopefully any new caretaker could come in and still be able to meet some aspects of the plan if they can see the options that can be provided, know it's been signed off by a vet, and then maybe you have like an enrichment closet or area they can go to quickly pull those items. Also, when you're looking at your plan, you really do want to identify some of that enrichment we talked about that promotes foraging or task-oriented feeding opportunities, things that might provide chewing, varied food items like ice blocks we talked about. And then these are key components that should all be covered and are super fun for the birds and fun to watch. All right, special consideration. So this is an area that seems to get marked not applicable often. So when we're looking at plans, the special considerations covers areas that if you have chicks, if you're pulling chicks younger, from a younger age and hand rearing, it also talks about not just how are you managing abnormal behaviors, but how are you identifying them to begin with. And so a lot of times if it's marked not applicable, we don't even know if there's actually been training to kind of talk about some of these things, because you might all of a sudden have a bird that's feather plucking. And if it wasn't identified and you don't have it marked on your plan, then that might become a problem. So one of my facilities recently marked when they had that they didn't have any birds currently with abnormal behaviors, but if they noticed something, that their first step was going to be to contact their veterinarian, and they were going to develop a plan from that. And that is, I thought, an excellent way to handle it. Like, they didn't have anything, but they knew they were going to bring their vet involved right away. It's a great route to go. So the next thing that would be covered besides special considerations would be restraint devices. So now restraint devices are really going to be listed for specific research type activities and facilities that fall under research protocols. So you're going to see that they're only going to be allowed for health reasons as determined by the attending veterinarian or an ICOOK approved research. Restraint should be done for the shortest period of time possible. And if the bird is restrained for more than 12 hours, they have to have at least 1 hour of continuous unrestrained activity. And then the next thing would be the last part of this whole plan is going to fall under exemptions. So again, exemptions are typically going to be for research specific activities. However, if you have a bird for any reason that's been exempted by a facility veterinarian, it must be documented and then reviewed every 30 days. So maybe you have a bird that can't have a specific type of enrichment, or you've had to pull them back for something. That's fine as long as it's documented, your veterinarian is aware of it, and you continue to review that. And then you want to keep that documentation at least for a year, and it does have to be made available to the APHIS officials when they're coming to look at your facility and your birds. So I hope this presentation overall has given you guys some better information on how to create that enrichment plan. We are so appreciative of your time, and I think we have a couple of moments to take any questions if possible. Thank you for the love, guys.
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, we have a couple questions. First question, when mentioned earlier that a bird is a bird, once the hatching process begins, do you consider this to be internal PIP, external PIP, or some other milestone?
That's a great question. It's going to be external PIP. So once that beak breaks through that outer shell.
Okay, thanks, Cody. Next question. This is a scenario, a sale of an African gray in a parking lot face-to-face with a bird in hand. The person does this, or the person does sell this way and sold more than 8 birds. Is a license needed under the pet retail exemption rule?
So it sounds like what you're describing is you have a person, the seller, you have the bird, the African gray, which an African gray is a pet bird species, and you have the buyer, and they're all in a parking lot. So to me, that would be and I assume the buyer is a retail, an end user. So that would be a retail pet store rule that would fall under that. So yes.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can research facilities purchase pet bird species from outside pet bird breeders? And would these birds be covered at the research facility?
So for research for if you have a research facility and they purchase a bird at a pet bird breeder, would it be covered at a research facility? No, it would not be covered at the research facility, because the reason why is you most likely, I'm gonna make one assumption. I'm gonna assume that pet bird was hatched in captivity. That's pretty sure assumption on that. And because it was hatched in captivity and then brought into and used for research purposes, it was bred for research. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Are there available examples of or for compliant environment enhancement plans?
There are available citations. Say that one more time.
Examples.
Examples of
Examples.
compliant
Yeah.
environment enhancement plans.
That's a great question. We do not have examples of ones. We are always, if you have one, or you would like if you're a licensed facility or registered registrant, you can always send it to your inspector or me, and we'd happy to give you any feedback on it, and let you know our thoughts on it. But we do not have any examples of one. No.
Okay, thank you. Is having a vet approve an enrichment a requirement or a recommendation? Our enrichment program is only approved by animal care management. If management has a concern, they will consult with the vet.
It is a requirement. Yes, that it must be approved by the attending vet. Great question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and cut the questions there.